joy and good vibes only, it often doesn't, right? It's inevitable that it doesn't. Abigail Disney, yes, that Disney, well, I don't know why you're thinking about it, but wrote in an article about this very subject. She said, the dynamics of wealth are similar to the dynamics of addiction. As you get more, you need more. And she also said in a recent speech in the spring, and she put it bluntly in saying, billionaires are miserable, unhappy people. And there was another article I found on this idea that was written by a therapist who actually works with this very group of people and had some interesting observations about the people that he works with who are wealthy. He says, what could possibly be challenging about being a billionaire, you might ask? Well, what would it be like if you couldn't trust those close to you, or if you looked at any new person in your life with deep suspicion? I hear this from my clients all the time. What do they want from me? Or how are they going to manipulate me? Or they're probably only friends with me because of my money. Then there are the struggles with purpose, the depression that sets in when you feel like you have no reason to get out of bed. Why bother going to work when the business you have built or inherited runs itself without you now? If all the necessities and much more were covered for the rest of your life, you might struggle with a lack of meaning and ambition too. My clients are often bored with life, and too many times this leads to them chasing the next high, chemically or otherwise, to fill that void. Money is seen as dirty and secret. Money is awkward to talk about. Money is wrapped up in guilt, shame, and fear. There is a perception that money can immunize you against mental health problems when actually, I believe that wealth can make you and the people closest to you much more susceptible to them. And so it's an interesting parallel as we get into Ecclesiastes 4, where he talks about wealth. He talks about working to achieve that wealth. He talks about the loneliness that comes with that wealth. And so as we've seen time and time again over the book of Ecclesiastes, he goes through these observations of what he deems to be futile, right? And that is where we'll start today, is talking about work and wealth in verse 4 in chapter 4 of Ecclesiastes. You can flip or tap your way there. But again, Ecclesiastes 4, verse 4, we're going to be starting there this morning. The teacher says this: I saw that all labor and all skillful work is due to one person's jealousy of another. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort in a pursuit of the wind. So again, no different here than previous times that we've gone through this book where he has made observations about the world around him and the various things that are going on. We've seen over and over again where he has deemed things to be futile. We've seen in previous passages, most notably in chapter 2, that he's talked about the futility of work, and he circles back to that again, but again with more observations. In chapter 2, he talks more about the meaninglessness of work in general, but here he has observed and identified the source of why people work. He says he's observed or learned that all labor and all skillful work is due to one person's jealousy of another. What fuels people's desires to work and get ahead is jealousy of someone else, the overwhelming need to be better than them. Right? This is why people want to work hard. This is why people want to continue to develop themselves. This is why people spend years and years throwing themselves into their work, because they're jealous of somebody else. They see how this other person works. They see the recognition that they get, and they need to be better. They need to. So they devote themselves to this work in order to best them, to be better than them, to get more recognition than them. And I don't think that's too far off from where we're at in a culture today. I think this is still true. We as a society kind of embrace this idea instead of being turned off by it. I think a profession we often see this publicly is in professional sports. If you remember a few years ago, at the beginning of the pandemic, the Last Dance documentary was going on, and it was about 4 or 5 weeks highlighting Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in pursuit of their 6th championship. I mean, the documentary was really just about Michael Jordan, but whatever. Anyway, there were several times in that documentary where they highlighted how Jordan would fabricate this almost jealous reaction to either coaches or players that he came into contact with, and almost fabricated this level of disrespect so they could motivate him to play better. I mean, he would literally make things up that they said to him just to get himself in a mindset to play well. I remember there was an interaction he had with a coach in a restaurant where he said, "Hey, Michael," and that was it. And Michael felt disrespected by that and fabricated this whole story as to why this guy was disrespecting him, and then proceeded to beat him the next night, right? Like, it's insane things. And the reaction from the sports world after seeing this unfold was, man, this is just a great guy, a great competitor. This just really just shows why he's the greatest of all time. And I'm like, what? Like, I just seems a bit over the top that he would rise to this level just to be the best player possible. Now, it doesn't need to be this big of a scale to see how jealousy of another can fuel work. Think of your own office spaces and places of work currently. How many times have you done extra work, volunteered for OT, volunteered for a special project because you wanted to look better than your coworker? Right? You saw the rise they had in your place of work and you wanted to be better than them. You know, right now, are you angling for some sort of promotion or good look because you don't want your coworker to get it? Right? Because of the source of work being revealed to the teacher here, he deems it futile. It's meaningless to work that hard. He sums us up quoting a proverb or a poem here of sorts, and he says, "The fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and pursuit of the wind." Kind of a backwards conflicting statement. But I think the point here is he's trying to make is that this is just all irony, the idea of working. It's all for nothing. It's a lose-lose situation. You're deemed a fool for not working because of work is how you get the necessary resources to survive. You eat, live, take care of yourself. You need to work to do these things or else you're going to die. But working hard with both hands and also all of your efforts is also a waste of time. It turns into the cycle that is meaningless for him, something I think most of us probably can relate to. We often get stuck in the mundane of it all, the routine of work, and at the end of the day, we realize that we're not happy. So then maybe we look for another job, then we get excited, we get that new job, we're happy for a little bit, but then the cycle just kind of creeps back in, and then we start all over. It's meaningless, it's futile. And we see in verse 7 that he continues to see further futility. "Again, I saw futility under the sun. There is a person without a companion, without even a son or brother, and though there is no end to all of his struggles, his eyes are still not content with riches. Who am I struggling for," he asked, "and depriving myself of good things? This too is futile and a miserable task. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up, but pity the one who falls without anyone to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm, but how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken." So here we talk about loneliness, right? The loneliness, specifically the loneliness of wealth. He tells a story of someone who doesn't have a companion, without anyone really. He doesn't have children, a sibling, a wife, brother, sister. He doesn't have anybody. He's truly alone. But he's also very wealthy, and we know that because we see that he says his eyes are not content with all of his riches. He labored so much, he gained extreme wealth due to his work, but it wasn't enough for him. He didn't need to share his riches with anyone. It was all his, but it was still not enough. He even asked himself, who am I struggling for? What am I depriving myself of good things for? Why do I keep resisting the things that I want to have? And why does it feel like I'm struggling when I got nobody here to share this with? Well, the teacher answered those questions for him, and it says, because your riches, your wealth, all of your work to get here, it's nothing. It's futile. It's miserable, in fact. Further ammunition for his argument. Like, see the super rich guy over here? See everything he has worked for? Well, guess what? It still means nothing to him, because he's not content, he's not happy, he is alone. He's buried himself in this work so much that he didn't develop relationships with anybody else. He did what society, he did what culture told him to do, work hard, get all these things, but then he's realized it wasn't enough. It's futile. But verse 9, this is where it gets really good. Verse 9, we get some encouraging, important truth from this teacher. Well, I think one of the most quoted parts of Scripture from the entire book of Ecclesiastes, I remember buying a picture frame myself with this verse on it a few years ago. 2 are better than 1. Right? 2 are better than 1. And this section can get associated with marriage quite a bit, which is probably why I'm up here talking about it, just because it always seems like I'm the one talking about marriage and love, regardless. But I think it fits well, but it's just not about marriage. It's not only about marriage. I think the teacher is stressing here the importance of community. Community. Having people to do life with. He lists examples of how it's important to be in community with other people. When someone falls, others can lift them up. They can help him recover. They can help him get better. They can be there for him. He says others can keep you warm and cold. Obviously, this is a simple idea, right? We understand body heat, but I think that it could also mean what he's getting at is that, hey, if you're struggling, somebody's going to be able to be there to meet your needs when you're in community with people. They are present. They will be there. They will help. And lastly, he mentions that multiple people are difficult to overpower. A cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Nothing or no one can overpower a group of people banded together. If someone or something attempts to defeat you, to bring you down, to make you question everything, you have the support and care from others who will not let you be defeated. Community, companionship is important. And just for a moment, stop and reflect. Who is this person for you? Who are these people to you? Maybe if you are married, it's your spouse, or maybe it's a sibling, or brother or sister, another family member, or maybe it's a group of people, like if you are in a city group here, like that, or another community that you're a part of. But just think for a moment, how have you seen this group of people pick you up when you've fallen? How have you seen them meet the needs you had in a difficult moment? How have you seen them help you stand your ground and not be overcome by some force you thought you had no chance against? I know for me, a few years ago in a previous church that we were a part of, Taylor and I were involved in a small group there, and it was really, I think, the first really community that we'd really been a part of, that we really stepped into and embraced. And it's like, man, I think back on that all the time, and I'm in awe of what God did to shape us with these group of people. And it's still a group of people that we see annually, that we get together with every year. We're all in various stages of life now. Some of us are out of state, some of us are across the state, but we make an effort every year to get together. And I just think back on that group of people, I'm like, man, we had people who lost jobs unexpectedly and didn't know what they were going to do. We had people who went just through unimaginable situations at home. We rallied for each other. We rallied for each other. It was a truly special group of people that I don't know if I would be here today, if we would be here today, if these people weren't investing and pouring in our lives. And experiencing that now too in the group that we're in as well, just people that we're doing life with on a Tuesday night, man, I don't know if I'm anywhere in my faith journey if these people aren't pouring into my life and caring about me. So on the flip side of this, if you don't have someone or a group of people, why not? What are some barriers preventing you from seeking that out or embracing that idea? I'm not suggesting that you immediately throw yourself into a group of 12, 15 people you don't know. Maybe you can handle that. But what I am supporting is the teacher's understanding and realization that this life, this journey, this walk with Jesus is not meant to be done alone. The futility of life that teacher has experienced here has been really the result of isolation. Right? He's seen person after person and even himself attempt to seek out their purpose in life by themselves. And he has this realization that maybe the reason life has been futile, maybe the reason everything I've seen and accomplished has been for nothing is because I have no one to share it with. A realization that up until this very moment, all that he's experienced has been isolation. All that he's experienced is loneliness. 2 are better than 1. Again, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. Verse 13. Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king, who no longer pays attention to warnings, for he came from prison to be king. Even though he was born poor in his kingdom, I saw all the living who move about under the sun follow a second youth who succeeds him, There is no limit to all the people who were before them, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. This too is futile in pursuit of the wind. So he ends chapter 4 with, you guessed it, more futility, right? He has that little brief part of encouragement, love that, but hey, this is something else I've observed that's also meaningless. He transitions out of that, and then he starts talking about kingship, leadership, and really just kind of this idea of political power. Right? He tells the story of a young man who rises to the throne. He first starts off with saying that, hey, he was young and poor, but he was also wise. He was young, poor, but wise, and how he was really in a better situation than the current king because he was old and foolish and no longer paid attention to warnings. He no longer listened to advice. He was set in his ways, did what he wanted to do, and there was no changing that. So this young guy who's poor, he's the future. And we see that he works his way out of prison. He has an inspirational story. He rises to the throne. He rises to the kingship. He makes himself out of nothing into something, resulting in him again becoming king. However, he's eventually replaced by somebody else, because he can't be king forever. And while there are many people who are rejoicing in him now, thankful for his leadership now, there are many who are going to come later who will not rejoice in him and just want him replaced. He realizes that this rise to political power is also futile because it's this constant cycle of being liked, being disliked, and then being replaced, which conveniently is how we choose our elected leaders now, right? At the local, state, and federal level. We get excited about a candidate who came from nothing, made themselves out of something, and then we relate to them. They get elected. We get excited about what they're going to do, but then things change as they get on. Right? Some remain excited about their prospects in office, but others become restless and no longer rejoice in this person and just want them replaced. Right? So those who pursue this power, the teacher says that you're pursuing the wind. The people who like you now, most of them will not like you in a few years. They just want you gone. So again, pretty down end of a chapter here. But then we go back up in chapter 5, at the beginning of chapter 5, and I hope you notice here a little bit, there's a change in his tone. He changes his tone. I hope you can catch on it because it shifts to something a little bit more serious. And so chapter 5, verse 1 through 7, this is where we're going to end our time this morning. Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. Better to approach in obedience than to offer the sacrifice as fools do, for they ignorantly do wrong. Do not be hasty to speak. Do not be impulsive to make a speech before God. God is in heaven and you are on earth. So let your words be few, just as dreams accompany much labor, so also a fool's voice comes with many words. When you make a vow to God, don't delay fulfilling it, because he does not delight in fools. Fulfill what you vow. Better that you do not vow than you vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth bring guilt on you, and do not say in the presence of the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry with your words and destroy the work of your hands? For many dreams bring futility, so do many words. Therefore, fear God. So again, just kind of a change in his tone. Things feel a little bit more serious here, kind of a different direction than anything that we've really seen from him thus far. Because really what we felt and seen from him is despair and depression and hopelessness over and over. But now we get some serious direction on what he believes is an important situation here, which is how to approach God, how to come before God. And contextually at this time, there was the building of the temple, right, that King Solomon oversaw, and that was deemed to be where God's presence was. That was his house. If you wanted to go before God, this is where you went. Right, so that's kind of, I think, the background, visual background for this passage that he's getting at here. But obviously that changed when Jesus came. Shout out Jesus, right? Where we don't have an actual, place. But things changed. But that's kind of this backdrop here. But I think, again, he's getting at the overall idea, the overall concept of, hey, this is how you should come before God. We should be intentional in how we do this. We should take this seriously because he is worthy of our full attention. And he breaks this down into three components. First, approach in obedience. Approach in obedience rather than out of guilt, sin, and shame. It's better to come to God obediently than to do so because you feel guilty and bad because you messed up and that you should offer, again, this sacrifice that he mentions here. It's better to come out of obedience because it's something that you're commanded to do. That's something that you are excited to do. And currently ask yourselves, okay, when I come to God, is it because I am excited to do so? Or is it because I screwed up? In your life currently, when are you most likely to come to him? Daily in prayer or here and there when things aren't going well? Because the teacher says, approach in obedience. Do this because you are commanded to do it. Do this because you are excited to do this. Don't be shamed into doing this. Number 2, use your words wisely. He says in verse 2, don't be hasty to speak. Don't be impulsive to make a speech before God. Do not be quick to start speaking when you've not thought out how you want this prayer or conversation to go. But also don't think too much that you're making this grand speech before him. The teacher says, God is in heaven, you are on earth. He is God. He is the creator of our universe. You are the one on earth living among these futile things. So your words shouldn't be centered around you. They should be centered around him. Be willing to say few words so you can sit back and listen to what he has to say. Because how can you gain wisdom and understanding from God if you're only willing to speak and not to listen? It even goes as far to say that, hey, fools speak many words. Fools just keep talking and talking and talking and don't really have any idea or any realization of how much they're talking, and they don't have any intention of listening to what God has to say. Don't be a fool, he says. And also don't make unfulfilled vows. That's also foolish. When you make a vow or commitment towards God, fulfill it quickly. Actually do the thing that you're telling God that you are going to do. It's better not to make a vow than to make one that you're not going to fulfill. And what are some examples of that? Well, I think maybe in our prayers or conversations with God that we confess that, hey, I'm struggling in spiritual disciplines. I'm struggling getting into your word. I'm struggling connecting with you consistently. I want to read your word more. I want to pray more. I want to open my time more for others to invest in them. But then we don't actually do anything, right? Or that we confess a sin that we're struggling with and we want to say, I'm not going to do this anymore, but then we don't do anything to curb our behavior to not do those things. Now, God doesn't expect perfection. I'm not stressing that. We're human. But I think what he does expect is that when you come to him and express these things, that you have a real desire to do those things. Verse 6 even says, don't let your mouth bring guilt on you. Do not say the things that you committed to God or were mistakes and see to fulfill them. Don't do that. As followers of Jesus, we're given grace when we fall short, and we'll always be given grace. So that's not different here. Why should God be angry and destroy the work of your hands? Why would God be so furious with you that you unfulfilled this, that he would destroy all the work that you're trying to do for him? That's not him. That's not his character. But once again, we need to take seriously how we approach him, talk with him, pray to him, because it culminates in his last component here, which I think this is really what this is about in verse 7, which is to fear God. Fear God. If we want to show God the utmost respect and honor he deserves when we come before him, we need to fear him. And this is not some scared of fear. We see this idea of fearing God all throughout Scripture. It's not intended to be a terrifying reaction to who God is. No, it's meant to respect and honor him, to stand in awe of who he is, to honor who he is. I think a common example that might help illustrate this is, if a CEO or a boss of a company, maybe where you work, this person doesn't scare you, but when you see them or interact with them, you become more aware of your actions, right? How you carry yourself, what you say. You're not going to act around them like you would your favorite coworker, right? Because that would go poorly. You have a respect for that person, so much so that you take your interactions with them seriously. Because God is not someone to be afraid of, he is someone to be worshiped. But God is not someone to be afraid of, he is someone to be worshiped. Respect and admiration towards God when coming to him leads to our worship of him. If we don't fear God and come before him with the seriousness he deserves, how can we be in worship with him? How can we worship him? When we take God seriously, this leads to us worshiping him even personally. having that connection with him. To escape the futility of our words, we must fear God. To avoid pursuing the wind, we must fear God. To worship our Creator with every part of our being, we must fear God. So in this passage, contextually, how do we do that? How do we fear God? Well, I think this can happen in three ways. I think one is that we ask. We come to him in seriousness. We seek wisdom and direction from him in our prayers with him, in our life with him. We ask for guidance. We ask for wisdom. We ask for direction. Right? And number two, that we listen. We listen to what it is that he's saying. We are listening to his words. We're listening to his response, and we're willing to be instructed by him. So we ask, we listen, and then we act, or we do. We follow through on what he is directing you to. We follow through on the guidance that he is giving you. Because you respect him, you honor him, you love him, you want to stand before him with the seriousness he deserves, you fear him. So I think asking ourselves as we get out of here this morning is, okay, what would it look like for me to fear him, right? What would it look for me? And maybe it involves surrendering some things that you're holding on to. I know we talked about that a couple weeks ago, but maybe it involves surrendering some things that you're holding on to. Maybe that involves stepping into community, into companionship, and having people who are willing to encourage you to continue that growth in your faith. But whatever it is, just this week, this month, be thinking that, especially going into this weekend, and just be thinking, okay, what does it look like to fear God? Pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for just who you are and all that you do for us. Lord, I thank you so much for community, for companionship, Lord, that we can share this life with other people, Lord, who are going to love us, who are going to care for us, who are going to pick us up when we fall, who are going to meet our needs when we're struggling, who are going to stand with us as we try to fight off the things that try to bring us down. Lord, and I thank you for that, and I pray that we would pursue that. And Lord, and I just pray that we would ultimately be God-fearing people, that we'd be fearing you, Lord, that we would be respecting you, that we would be honoring you, Lord, that we would seek you out in every aspect of our lives. Lord, we thank you, we love you, and we pray.